Beverly Hills, September 9th, 2002. A 72 years old man has been lured into a hotel lobby on Rodeo Drive. He thinks he's about to be filmed for a Japanese children's TV program about space. He isn't. A younger man stepped into his path holding a Bible with a camera crew right behind him. He demands the older man swear on the Bible that he actually walked on the moon. The older man tries to walk away. The man with the Bible follows him, grabs onto him, and calls him a coward, a liar, and a thief. The older man is Buzz Aldrin. He, the second person in the human history to set foot on a celestial body other than the Earth, July 20th, 1961, about 20 minutes after Neil Armstrong. The man with the Bible is Bart Sibrel, a filmmaker and one of the most prominent voices behind the theory that the United States never actually went to the moon. Aldrin, 72 years old at the time, ended up punching him into the jaw. The Beverly Hills police looked into it, and no charges were ever filed. The district attorney's office concluded that Sibrel provoked the incident. That image, a 72 years old moonwalker who finally can't take it anymore and threw a punch, has become one of the most shared clips in the history of the conspiracy theory. For some, it's proof of guilty conscience finally cracking. For others, it's simply an old man who's tired of being called a systemic traitor to his country in front of a camera he never agreed to stand in front of. And that is what this episode is about, not settling who is right, but understanding why so many people in so many countries, in so many languages, still, after more than half a century, believe that one of the best documented technological moments in the history was a set. For you. You think moon landing skepticism was a relic of the 1970s, slowly dying off, along with the last analog TV sets? It isn't. In late October 2025, actress and reality star Kim Kardashian's publicist says that she didn't believe that the US landed on the moon. She referencing, incorrectly as it turns out, a Buzz Aldrin quote taken out of context from 2015 interview. NASA's acting administrator responded publicly within days, and British physicists from the Institute of Physics stated that every single argument that NASA faked the landing has been debunked. And it's not an isolated case. A large share of the Russian population, by some polls up to 2/3, doesn't believe Americans went to the moon. That is not a small fringe segment. That's the majority of one of the world's most spacefaring nations. Why does this particular theory hold so well when so many conspiracy theories from the same area, UFO bases under Antarctica, flat Earth, arguments about NASA's logo, remain fringe phenomenon? Part of the answer is how perfectly the Apollo program fits into our deepest instinctive suspicions. A government that lies during wartime, a science too complex for ordinary people to check for themselves, and a set of photographs that's, honestly speaking, looks a little too perfect for a trip to another world. That's the suspicion that we are going to dig into today, not with mockery, with source criticism. Let's start with what we actually knew before anyone started doubting it. The Apollo program was launched by John F. Kennedy in 1961 as a direct response to the Soviet Union's early lead in the space race. Sputniks in 1957, Yuri Gagarin as the first human in space in 1961, Kennedy's promise to put a man on the moon before the end of this decade is out was much as a Cold War political maneuver as it was a scientific projects. The road there wasn't without tragedy. In January 27 in 1967, a fire broke out in the command module during a ground test of Apollo 1. Astronauts Gus Grimson, Ed White, and Roger Caff died within seconds. The cabin was pressurized with pure oxygen, and a spark from a faulty wiring was all it took. NASA's own investigations board found concrete technical failures, flammable materials in the cabin, a hatch that couldn't be opened fast enough, and a defective electrical installation. It was a scandal that led to a complete redesign of the spacecraft. 2.5 years later, on July 16, 1961, the Saturn V rocket, still one of the most powerful rockets humanity has ever built and successfully flown, lifted off from Cape Kennedy with Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins on board. 4 days later, on July 20th, the lunar module Eagle touched down in the Sea of Tranquility. Armstrong stepped onto the surface at 2:56 UTC on July 21st and spoke the now famous words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." 5 more crew landings follows from Apollos 12 to 17, with the exceptions of the ill-fated Apollo 13 mission, which never landed but returned home after an explosion in the service module. In total, the astronauts brought 382 kilograms of lunar rocks and soil. That's the established narrative. It's documented across thousands of NATO archives, independently confirmed by physicists around the world, and now, as we later will see in this episode, by data from spacecraft built by 4 other nations besides the United States. Skepticism about the Apollo didn't start as a grassroots movement. It started with one man and a self-published pamphlet. Bill Kaysing, working as a technical writer at Rocketdyne, the company that built the F-1 engines for the Saturn V rockets, from 1956 to 1963. In 1976, he published the book "We Never Went to the Moon, America's $30 billion Swindle." Its central claim is that he has seen an internal study calculating the probability of a successfully crewed moon landing at 0.0017%. That number has been repeated for decades. In nearly every source I reviewed for this episode, from French to Spanish to Russian productions, but there is a problem. No such study has ever been found by any researchers anywhere. Kaysing left Rocketdyne before Apollo's technical design was ever finished, and he had no engineering background. He was a writer, not an engineer. NASA's own internal calculations from the same period show, if anything, roughly an 87% probability of at least one successful moon landing before the end of the 1960s. Kaysing's book laid the groundwork. In 2001, Fox aired a widely watched special, Conspiracy Theory, Did We Land on the Moon?, which was dubbed and rebroadcasted in countless of countries, including the Portuguese and Spanish versions that I review in this research material for the episode. It's worth noting that several of the independent international documentations I analyzed, in fact, is translations from the same 2001 American Fox program. Not independent investigations, but the same source retold in multiple languages. This is where the first rule of our source hierarchy becomes relevant. A source repeating in five languages is not automatically five times more true. It's just that the same story translated five times. Now, let's give the conspiracy theory a fair treatment, its own. No strawman, the strongest, most frequently repeated arguments presented the way that was actually made. We start with the flag. The most iconic evidence of all, the American flag planted by Armstrong and Aldrin, appears to ripple and move on the video footage. The moon is essentially no atmosphere and therefore no wind. So how can a flag move? Unless it was filmed on a soundstage with a fan just outside the frame. Second, the missing stars. None of the thousands of photos taken from the lunar surface show a single star against the black sky. Even though the astronauts themselves describe being able to see stars with the naked eyes. For skeptics, the logic is simple. If you are on the moon at night with no atmosphere to obscure the light, the sky should be full of stars. That's empty, black void. Around them looks more like a painted studio ceiling. Third, the shadows. In several photos, shadows from different objects appears to point in seemingly different directions, not parallel, as you would expect with one light source, the sun. The conclusion, according to the critics, is that there has been multiple artificial light sources at play, like a film set. The Van Allen radiation belts. Between Earth and the Moon lies two belts, intentionally trapped by electromagnetic particles discovered by the physicist James Van Allen in 1958. According to several of the sources in my research, including Bart Sibrel's documentary A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, a human body passing through these belts without massive lead shielding would have been killed or severely injured by the radiation. The spacesuits and the capsules walls of the area was, according to this theory, far too thin. Lastly, there is the missing crater. The lunar module's descent engines should, according to the laws of physics, have generated a powerful downward blast at the landing, enough to create a visible crater, or at least a clear depression on the lunar dust beneath the engine nozzles. In the photographs, there is no crater, just a flat, undisturbed surface right beneath the lunar module's feet, as if it has been simply been placed there rather than landed. That is the core. The 4 or 5 claims that recur in practically all 30 sources in my material, regardless of language, country of production, the flag, the stars, the shadows, the radiation, and the crater. These are the shared international currency of moon landing skepticism. But if you follow the trail further down the rabbit hole, the story quickly gets more colorful and more speculative. Bart Sibrel, the man from the Gold Open, claims to have found unreleased NASA footage showing astronauts filming a fake window trick in low Earth orbit to simulate being halfway to the moon, with a round window, a darkened cabin, and a model of Earth. He was confronted several Apollo astronauts directly with these claims on camera. From the same source material, a series of even more dramatic threats emerge. An anonymous security officer who allegedly confessed on his deathbed having witnessed the fake landing being filmed on a US Air Force base in 1968. The story that astronaut Gus Grissom, the one from the Apollo 1 fire, was actually murdered because he intended to expose problems in the programs to Congress. A safety inspector named Thomas Ronald Barron, who testified critically about safety deficits in the Apollo program before the Congress and died in a car accident a week later, portrayed as several of our sources as silencing assassinations. And then there is Stanley Kubrick's theory that the director who made the 2001 A Space Odyssey that same year was secretly hired to film the fake moon landing using the area's most advanced special effects. And he left hidden confessions embedded in his later film, The Shining. At the most extremist end of the material I reviewed is a Russian video categorized as sensationalist in my research. The moon landing theory melds together with an entirely different conspiracy thread that NASA was founded by a former Nazi SS scientist brought over through Operation Paperclip, that Armstrong and Aldrin were high-ranking Freemasons who performed a secret ritual on the moon, and that the real motive behind the hoax was concealing the truth about extraterrestrial life. It's worth noting that how differently these threats are being carried out. Some, like Sibrel's confrontations, are documented on video and can be checked directly. Others, like anonymous deathbed confessions and murder theories with no forensic documentation, rest on loose, unverifiable anecdotes. And the most extreme versions with Freemasons and Nazis are essentially conspiracy theories college using the moon landing as a glue for an entirely separate narrative. So, what does the physics says, and what do independent data says? If we start with the flag, according to NASA and several space centers, including UK's National Space Center, the flag moves because the astronauts themselves twisted the flagpole back and forth to get it into the ground, not because of the wind or wind. Without air resistance to dampen the motion, the fabric keeps swinging longer than it would on Earth. The flag also have an horizontal extension rod that couldn't always be fully extended, which created a permanent creases that looks like the movements was in still photos. Importantly, in all the continuous footage, the flag stills perfectly still whenever the astronauts aren't touching. If you look at the missing stars, the cameras were set to short exposure times because the primary job was photographing the intensely sunlight surface and the astronauts themselves, not the night sky. With short shutter speed, film simply didn't register the faint light from distant stars. The same way ordinary camera photographing a night sky without long exposures won't pick up stars either. The same holds true for astronauts on the International Space Station today. Their photograph doesn't show stars either. If we look at the shadows, what look like parallel shadows in a perspective effect, the same phenomenon makes the railroad tracks appears to converge into the horizon, even through that they actually parallel. Combined with the fact that the lunar surface is uneven, full of hills and depressions, that the shadows with the same light source can easily appear to point in different directions when photographed from ground level. Then we have the fanale belts. Here, NASA's is contract measurement data. Every NASA astronaut wore a personal radiation dosimeter for the entire mission. The recorded dose ranged from 0.16 and 1.14 rad for the whole round trip, far below the thresholds of radiation that becomes harmful. And here we are discussing hundreds of rad, and roughly on par with a person today would get from a single CT scan. The key is that the Saturn V rocket flew through the thinnest zones of the belt at a very high speed, only about an hour in total, and that the spacecraft missile hulls itself providing shielding. James Van Allen, the man who discovered the belt and had them named after him, personally called the claim of lethal radiations for nonsense. The missing crater. The lunar module descent engines operated on relatively low thrust and was designed to reduce speed gradually, not to slam down with full power. In the final phase of the landing, the engines would still be firing. The module hovered just a few meters above the surface with a relatively gentle push. Nowhere the near strong to dig a crater into the compact lunar soil, which incidentally is far firmer than the loose sand. And then there is the evidence the conspiracy theory simply can't argue its way around. In 2009, NASA sent the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter into orbit around the Moon. From the altitude as low as 20 kilometers, it has photographed every single Apollo landing site in sharp detail. The lower sections in the lunar modules still standing there, rover tire tracks and astronauts' footprints crisscrossing the surface in patterns that precisely matches the original mission logs. But NASA isn't the only one who seems to have seen it. India's Chandrayaan Rob something probe, Japan's Kaiguya, and China's Chang'e missions have all independently photographed parts of the lunar surface, including areas near the Apollo landing sites, built and launched by nations that has zero political interest in confirming an American hoax story. Even more tangible, 3 of the Apollo landing sites, astronauts left behind small mirror panels called retroreflectors. They're still there. They still work. Scientists around the world at observatories, that was hard to say, in US, in France, and elsewhere, firing lasers at them and measuring how long time it takes the light to bounce back, calculating Earth-Moon distance, which in millimeters. They were placed there by people standing on the surface, not by robotic, as some of my sources claim. The Soviet Lunobuk rovers had their own separate reflectors. Finally, the 382 kilograms of lunar rock and soil the astronauts brought back has been analyzed by hundreds of independent laboratories in the decades since, including labs in countries with zero incentive to confirm the American story. The isotopic composition doesn't match any known material from Earth, and a statistical analysis published in the scientific journal PLOS ONE concluded that a hoax at this scale would have required more than 400,000 people in the secret without a single documented leak in over 55 years. Last but not least, in 2001, an American TV show, Mythbusters, put several of the classic claims under the microscope for a dedicated episode. The flag, the shadows, the missing stars, the reflected light. Using physical experiments, not just arguments, they concluded that every claim that they have tested could be explained by ordinary physics. Let's be honest about what we have here. The five classics pieces of evidence, the flag, the missing stars, the shadows, the radiation belts, and the crater, are all well documented physical phenomena with concrete, checkable explanations backed by NASA's own measurements data and independent international research. These belong in the well documented category. The independent spacecraft imagery from four nations and the still functioning retroreflectors are likewise well documented evidence that there is, in fact, human made equipment sitting on the lunar surface, not because NASA says so, but because countries that has no interest in confirming the American story photographed it there by itself. Bill Casing's 0.0017% figure is weakly substantiated. The source does not exist, and the number is directly contradicted by NASA's own contemporary survival calculations. Bart Sibrel's confrontations with astronauts are documented on video and can be watched directly, but his interpretation with the footage prove remained speculative since the underlying claim about hidden NASA footage has never been independently verified by a third party. The anonymous deathbed confessions, the murder theories about Gimson and Byron, and Kubrick's theory are speculative to, should we say, weakly substantiated. The rest of the anecdote with no forensic documentary support, and in several cases, like circulating Rubik's confessions, has since been directly exposed as states mockumentaries. The Nazis, the Freemasons, and the UFO add-ons to the theories belongs to the most extreme, least source criticism, and to the end of the spectrum can still be classified as weakly substantiated. And then there's about Thomas Ronald Barron's fatal accidents. Here we should be honest that there is a real documented element. Barron really did testify critically in the safety deficiencies before the conquest, shortly before the Apollo 1 fire, and he really did die shortly after a car accident. The connections between these two uh, between these two events, and whenever the accident was anything other than an accident, is not definitively settled in the public available material. We have access to it. We placed it as unresolved category, not disproven, but not proven either. So where does that leave us? The physical and technical core on the moon landing conspiracy theory, the flag, the missing stars, the shadows, the radiation, and the crater, have been thoroughly investigated, tested, and explained by independent physicists, TV shows like Mythbusters, and not least by NASA's own archive measurement data. And the evidence that people that really there is no longer just American, it had come from India, from Japan, and China from nations that has absolutely no reason to confirm an American story if it was false. But it would be dishonest to pretend that the whole theory is just about physics. It's also about something more humane, a deep, understandable distrust of authorities that have historically lied. The Vietnam, the Watergate, later revelations about civilians. It's about how hard it is for laypersons to tell the difference between a poorly explained detail and an actual deception. And it's about how satisfying it is for one human level to believe a small group can uncover what hundreds of thousands are supposedly hiding. Bart Sibrel still believes his theory. Buzz Aldrin, who passed away in 2024, was one of the last living Apollo astronauts, never grew tired of defending what he seems to with his own eyes from the surface of the moon. And somewhere in between stands the rest of us, with access to no more data than ever before and the choice about what to believe. When the story and the physics are actually available for us, that is where I want to leave you today. Not with proof, with a question about what actually takes before we can take something for true. And speaking of names, it's hard to get it right, my own included. My name is René, and I know that an American ear, it can look like it should sound rhythm if something is if it doesn't. If you have been quite I can't say that. If you have been quietly pronouncing it's Ren or Rern in the whole episode, don't worry. You are in good company, and I promise I would not hold it against you. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next episode.